Well, thanks everybody for coming. Happy that you're interested in maybe learning a little bit more about philanthropy and book and me. I know I've had somebody tell me, I guess it was you, said, "Oh, I've known you for years, but now I'm really going to get to know you." So the book, which is called My Journey in Philanthropy, Memoir, Reflective Essays, and True Stories. And it started out about 14 years ago in 2004 when I've always had this feeling that there was a funny, quirky, unusual side to philanthropy that a lot of people never get to see unless you're kind of on the inside of it. So I thought, I'm going to write this book all about the quirky, funny, interesting, humorous things. So I sent out about 200 letters to colleagues around the country in other foundations, and I thought, wow, this is going to be great. I'm going to get lots of stories. Everybody's got to have stories. I got one response. I was like devastated. So I put the project on the shelf for a while, and between 2004 and 2017, I had little fits and starts about getting back into the book, and in, I guess it was September maybe of 2017, I had June McInerney on my TV show, and I made it know where she's a local author. And before we went on camera, I was talking about my project, and I said, hey, it's going nowhere. And she said, well, I'll help you with it. So she did. So she's the one that actually suggested that I combine the stories that I did have, which was 32. Over those years, I was able to accumulate 32 funny stories. And I had written a number of essays along the way. And she says, why don't you make it, part memoir, part the essays, and part funny stories. So I said, okay, that sounds reasonable. So that's kind of how the book came about. It was a 14-year journey, and not only a journey in philanthropy, but a 14-year journey to get the book written. And actually had a lot of fun with it. And I had 5 different people edit it from different perspectives. A friend of mine was an English professor, and he did it from that angle, and I had a couple people from the Health and Human Services angle and nonprofits, and they did it. And then of course June was editor, and so was Lynn. She was one of the early ones. So it was actually fun, and I found out that I really liked writing a lot. And on the heels of this book, actually I started working with a colleague, Connie Carter, that we're going to co-author another book with a lot of essays related to the nonprofit sector and philanthropy. But this one's going to have cartoons and inspirational quotes in it too that relate to nonprofit management or philanthropy. So that's kind of like the history of the book. And let me go into the memoir section. It starts out with the big influence in my life was my parents. I'm an only child. Grew up in Philadelphia when I was really young in the Tioga section of North Central Philly, and my parents were not very well off, hardworking people. They only went to the 9th grade. They grew up in the Depression, and but they provided me with a very nice life. And my father, particularly, was always very always involved in community service of some sort. He was an usher at the church. He called bingo at the bingo games. He was a volunteer ambulance driver for a number of years. He worked at the church carnivals, and he was always good about visiting the sick, whether it was a neighbor or relatives or anything like that. So I kind of got that flavor from him. And then my mom worked in a factory. My dad worked in a factory, and when they both retired, they both went to do volunteer work in an organization that's based in Northeast Philly, but actually they do work here in the Phoenixville area called Aid for Friends. Aid for Friends, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a charitable organization that provides cooked meals for shut-ins. And it's a big operation now, but it's about 45 years old. And so my dad was a driver. He would like pick up the meals. How the program works is if you could volunteer to, say if you're cooking for 4, you might volunteer to cook an extra meal. So you would cook for 5, and they provide you with the containers and everything. And then the driver would come like once a week, pick up the food that you had prepared, take it to their central place, and then they would be delivered, kind of like Meals on Wheels does, to the people who need it. And my mom, she always liked administrative work, so she worked in the central office of Aid for Friends. So they both did that for a number of years, and then after my dad passed away in 1986, my mom also started working, in addition to Aid for Friends, across the street at a retirement home called Immaculate Mary Home in Northeast Philly, and she worked in the day program there until she moved up to Phoenixville to be closer to me so I could take better care of her. She lived to be 95 and a half. My father died at the age of 69. So anyway, they were a big influence on my life in terms of kind of first introducing me to community service and things like that. But I also kind of, for some reason, I don't know why, had a natural bent that way. And always was interested in kind of social science type things. And so when I graduated high school, went to LaSalle High School, LaSalle College, then it's now LaSalle University, always kind of had an interest in this kind of thing. I never knew that there was anything called a foundation, believe it or not, until 1977. And when I was hired by an organization in Wilmington, I spent 31 years of my life in the state of Delaware, working and living and raising my family there. And I worked for this organization called Child Inc., Child Incorporated. And Child Incorporated is a small nonprofit agency that dealt with abused, neglected, dependent kids and women who were victims of domestic violence. And I was hired on a family foundation grant called the Ferris Family Foundation, which is a small family foundation in Wilmington, Delaware. And at the same time, I was going part-time to get my doctorate degree at the University of Delaware. And I said, wow, this is kind of cool. You know, you could like fund people and then still be involved in the kinds of things that really turned you on related to health and human services. But you didn't have to be on the front lines to do it. So when I graduated in 1979, I picked out 4 areas that I would like to pursue my future career in. And foundation management was one of them. So 1980, a year later, I was reading the Sunday newspaper. I had been living on federal grants for like 9 years. And I figured, well, now my kids are getting bigger and I got a wife to support, and I better get something a little bit more substantial. So I answered a blind ad in the newspaper. And this shows you to me like how God looks over you. It turned out to be the Glen Mead Trust Company and the Pew Charitable Trust, which, like at the time, were like the 5th largest foundation in the world in terms of their assets. At that time, they had about $4 or $5 billion in assets. So I was hired there, and I wasn't there like 2 weeks, and I said, this is where I gotta be. This is like, I loved every aspect of it. And I kind of was taken under the wing by a lady by the name of Ruth Parker, who next week, Lynn and I are going to help celebrate her 100th birthday.
Wow.
And she taught me the ropes of foundation work, and she personally knew J. Howard Pugh. She was hired by him to help start off his foundation back in 1956. And she and I have been friends ever since. But anyway, I found out, you know, you have that inner voice and you say, this is it. This is like what I want to do. But there was a hitch. And the hitch was that I didn't fit in with the corporate culture very well at Pew. Pew was, at least at that time, was a very, very, very conservative place. And I came from an organization, Child Inc., at the time, that was extremely liberal. It was an advocacy agency, and you know, we would take on the legislature for bills and things like that. So at the time I was like, I don't know, 32, 33 years old, and I thought I could act the same way at Pew as I did at Child Inc. And found out that it was an uphill battle. So to make a long story short, I kind of left. I left there for 3 years. You know, I used to get in trouble for, those of you who applied for grants, you know, I'd get in trouble for telling people or organizations like why they got turned down. Or if I was, you know, giving them a little bit too much counsel about a project or something. So I figured it wasn't a really good fit. Then I was out of philanthropy for 9 years. Because there's probably something like 75 or 80,000 foundations in the country, but only about 1% have any staff at all. So it's an area that's not easy to find another position. And I was a little cocky at the time. So when I left Pew and I had some contacts, the fellow who at the time was the chief judge of the family court was a friend of mine, and he had contacts at the Pont Company. So I figured the social responsibility part of a corporation, that would be really cool, and I'd like to work there. So he got me the meeting, and the guy comes in, and he was pretty matter of fact. And you know, here I was, like armed with a PhD, and I had the Pew background, and I thought, this is going to be cool. I'm just going to walk in and have this job. And so the guy says, we don't care if you have a PhD. He said, and we don't care if you worked at Pew. He said, the way corporate philanthropy works is they hire people from within the company, because to the company, it's more important that you know the inner workings of the company than the actual practice of the philanthropy. So we can teach you the philanthropy stuff. So that like took the air out of my balloon real fast. And so it was like 9 years before I was able to get back into philanthropy. Still kept active in doing some consulting work along the way. And so I had left Pew in January of 1983. And again, through the luck and good blessing of God, 9 years later, in the spring of 1992, I had left the University of Delaware. Oh, I'm skipping over that. Let me get into the University of Delaware part. So when I left Pew, I worked at a retirement community in Wilmington called Peninsula United Methodist Homes. Wonderful organization. I was like 35, 36 years old at the time, and I felt like a fish out of water. I said, what am I doing with all these old people here? You know, it just didn't fit right for me. So although, you know, I did well in the job, I was Director of Public Relations and Development. They actually hired me, and I had not one day of fundraising background. They hired me on the strength of that I worked for Pew. But anyway, so I had 2 years there, was successful, and but I just wasn't happy. So I had contacted a guy I was in my doctoral program with, Rich Steinman, and he worked in Governor Castle's administration as the director of the Division of State Service Centers. Now, state service centers sounds like gas stations, okay? But they're not. They're like multi-service centers, okay, which is something actually for 20 years I've been trying to get here. So he hired me as his deputy director in it's called an exempt position. It's a non-civil service type position. And I was there a little over a year, got promoted to be the chief of staff to the secretary of the entire Department of Health and Social Services for the state. And that was a great learning experience. I mean, learned a lot from this guy named Tom Eichler, who's mentioned in the book as one of the people who were really influential in my life. Tom was an excellent administrator. He knew of my desire to get back into philanthropy, and he was very supportive of it, so I gave vacation time to do some consulting projects. And I had the opportunity came my way to go to the University of Delaware as the director of development, working under the vice president for advancement. And at that time, vice president for advancement was in charge of fundraising, alumni relations, and public relations. And so I was involved with the fundraising part of it. And that went kind of well. There was an interim president, a the president who had been the president before for 18 years, he retired. They hired another guy. He lasted 18 months. They fired him. They brought Dr. Trabant back, and that was the period in which I was hired. They did a search, hired another president. I'm not going to tell you his name. You'll see why in a minute. That president abolished my boss's job. So I then reported directly to the president. And fundraising was going really well. Had a staff of 30 people. I also discovered during this period of time of self-discovery that I don't really like supervising people, that I like the creative process of program development more. And so I had this aha, which is in the book, this aha moment. I was in the office one night. At this time I was separated from my wife, so I was spending a lot of time at the office at night, and I was signing thank you letters, and all of a sudden it's just boom, you don't really want this. You don't really like this. You really want to go back to kind of the thing you were doing. So anyway, fundraising was still going well. I took the president to, I was driving the president to a, now this isn't, what I'm going to tell you now, I'm telling you more than what's in the book. I won't mention names because it's pretty horrific, but I was driving the president to, he was on the board of Big Brothers and not Big Brothers, the Boys Club and Girls Club of Wilmington. Driving into an event, we're stopped on campus at a traffic light, and it's May of 1991, and we're talking business, and he says to me, I don't mean to be so graphic, but he says, you would have to have sex with a four-legged animal for me to get rid of you. That was a direct quote. So I'm like, I've never heard something like that before. So 6 months later to the day, I get fired. As I told you, he had abolished my boss's job. I then was reporting to him. Every week I would have a meeting with him to bring him up to date on what was happening with all the different facets of fundraising. And so it was 1:30 in the afternoon, January 15th, 1991. And I go into the office, and his first words to me were, "You're not going to like what I have to tell you." And I said, "What do you mean?" He says, "Effective 4:30 this afternoon, I want you out of the university." And he said, I'm going to resurrect the position of Vice President for Advancement, and I want somebody who's older, somebody who's already raised $100 million in a campaign, and who's already been a Vice President for Advancement. And you don't meet any of those criteria. So I was like in shock. My son was in the middle of his senior year at Salesianum School, high school. He was really hopped up on going to Johns Hopkins to play baseball, because he was being recruited by different schools. And so I said, well, you know, I'm due like a severance. And he goes, "Oh, really?" So to make a long story short, I negotiated 2 more days, left, that was a Wednesday, left on a Friday afternoon, called my staff. I used to have what I would call team meetings, so like once a month I'd have all 30 people together, and I'd bring them up to date with stuff that was happening at the university and so forth, and they could just, you know, give me ideas of stuff or whatever. It was just like an open conversation time. So I called this meeting, 4:30 Friday, told them what happened, left the door and never came back. That was pretty traumatic. And so I asked the president when this happened, I said, like, well, can I work someplace else on the university campus until I find another job? No. And that was really mean, because I know it had happened many, many other times where they do that in a big university, they can find a place for you. So that was traumatic, because I never again was able to trust anybody in the corporate culture, even today, because you just never. I felt like it was a kamikaze attack on me. So anyway, so that was kind of a traumatic. So I left the university and was doing some consulting work with a fundraising consulting firm that's located in Kennett Square named McIntyre Associates. And here again, God comes into the picture. I was assigned to a project for this Christian school called Lanchester Christian School, and they had a capital campaign going on. And one of the people I had to call on was a fellow by the name of Skip Houston, and the Houston family were the longtime major stockholders of Luke and Steel, and the family had 2 foundations. So I called on him for the Houston Foundation. Didn't know that there was another foundation called the Stewart Houston Charitable Trust. I had known Skip slightly because when the Houston family started their foundations back in the early 80s, they had it managed at Pew. So I used to be in meetings with them once in a while, so we had a vague, knowledge of each other. So if you know Skip, great guy, very blusterous kind of guy, and he's saying, well, you should not only ask me for money for the Houston Foundation, but also Stewart Houston Charitable Trust. And I said, he had never heard of that one. So he goes, well, it's being managed by this law firm in Philadelphia, and we're paying them a lot of money to do things they're not really set up to do. So he describes what he wants, and it's like got me written all over it. So the next day I called him, next morning I called him, and I said, Skip, I need to talk to you because I think I can fulfill everything you're looking for. So again, it was serendipitous. About 2 months went by before they got the trustees together and everything to approve it, and I was hired part-time for a couple of months. And then when I kind of proved myself in November of '92 is when I started full-time there. And I'm indebted to Skip because he helped me get back into philanthropy in a field that I absolutely love, and was there for 6 years. We did, I think, a lot of good things. The family had and still does have not only an interest in Chester County and Coatesville, but in Savannah, Georgia as well, because there's a lot of family roots there. And then I got recruited away 20 years ago to take over this foundation here when it started up. So the journey part of this has had ups and downs, had a lot of some nasty things happen, some really good things. I think I felt that God was there to help me along the way. And I had the good fortune of having some really good experiences along the way that now that I'm at the tail end of my career, I think helped me be a better practitioner of philanthropy. The Pew experience, even though from a corporate culture standpoint it was not a good fit, it was like putting a square peg in a round hole. That's the way I look at it. But from a standpoint of exposure and broadening myself, like I didn't know anything about public television, but we funded a lot of public television all around the country. So I got to meet, high-level officials from public television stations. And I've told this story to Lynn. One of my really fun experiences with this fellow named Frank Mankiewicz, who was the brother-in-law of Jack Kennedy. And at the time, he was the head of National Public Television. And I remember doing a site visit in New York City in his office, and he was the coolest guy. We were sitting in his couch and feet up on the table, and he's talking about public television, and he's educating me about public television. And I'm thinking to myself, this is Jack Kennedy's brother-in-law. It's like, why am I here? So it was a broadening experience. I got to meet a lot of interesting people. Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was the founder of OIC. That was another larger-than-life type experience. Physically, he was a very large man, very dignified, and got to spend an hour with him when he came to Pew for funding of his OIC, Opportunities Industrialization Center program. And one of the greatest honors I ever had along the way was in 2009, OIC of Chester County honored me with the Leon Sullivan Award for community service. And that was like really special because this guy was, like I said, he's larger than life. And not only did he found OIC and how much OIC has helped people all around the country, but he's also the founder and the creator of what's called the Sullivan Principles. And that was, they were corporate principles to be adopted by corporations around the world to do away with discrimination against blacks, and it started in South Africa. So he had a major impact on the world. And the other interesting thing was when I told you I was, in my early years, I was born and raised in the Tioga section of Philly. I lived at 19th Pacific Street, and his church, that he was a reverend, his church was like 5 blocks away at Mount Zion Baptist Church on Broad and Tioga. So that's kind of enough like maybe about me. And anybody have any questions about this or?
Did your son make it to Johns Hopkins with the ball?
He did, in a roundabout kind of way. When I got the interest from the Stuart Houston Charitable Trust, they had not, as you know, from having sons and daughters in college, they got to make a decision like May 1st. Well, the Stuart Houston Charitable Trust trustees had not made their decision whether they were going to hire me or not at that point. So I told Dave, I said, like, really want you to go there, but I know it's your dream. And I said, but I don't have the job yet, so I don't know if I can make that commitment. And at the time, now this is 1992, the tuition now at Hopkins is about $70,000 a year. Then it was $27,000 a year, and it was still a lot of money, and I was paying child support, and I was separated. And so anyway, he also fortunately had a 90% academic scholarship to Mount St. Mary's in Emmitsburg, Maryland. So he took that, and he was there for a year and a half. And then when things solidified, he switched over to Johns Hopkins and wound up playing baseball as captain of the team, and that helped launch his coaching career in baseball. He's been at Haverford College now for 21 years. And so it all worked out kind of well, kind of pretty good. Let me switch gears into what I would call, the second part of the book about essays. Let me see which one. Here it is. In the book, I invent a new word. It's called philanthropoid. A philanthropoid is distinguished from a philanthropist in my mind. A philanthropist, as everybody knows, is somebody who gives away their own money. But after many years of practicing and working at 3 different foundations, I figured there needed to be a distinction. So I invented the word philanthropoid, and that's a person like me who gives away other people's money. Okay. So, in the first essay, I talk about the differences in that, and how we feel that people that have money have a moral obligation to not forsake those who don't. Okay. In the second essay, it has to do with philanthropists. It's called Philanthropists, Philanthropoids, and Practitioners Working Together to Serve and Impact Communities. Basically, that chapter is about how philanthropists and philanthropoids, together with nonprofit organizations, can really impact communities, and that we both need each other. And I say this all the time, you probably have heard this at the Grantee Forum, how we're partners in this endeavor of philanthropy, and together we can accomplish great things. Foundations, philanthropists, individual philanthropists, corporations, they have the money to do things, but they don't deliver the service. Nonprofit organizations have the services, but they don't have the money. So in order for good things to happen, and for the foundation or corporate philanthropist or the individual philanthropist mission to be satisfied, they need the nonprofit organizations. So I've always looked at that as the way to look at philanthropy. Some people in philanthropy look at it as a power kind of a thing. It's like it's my money or our money, and it's your job to get it out of us. Okay, and I've never subscribed to that because I don't think it's fair, and I think I've always been a partnership kind of a person, teamwork kind of person, and I guess that's from my athletic background. So please ask me questions about this, because I was hoping that this could be as interactive as possible.
What was your PhD in? Yeah.
Urban affairs and public policy. I usually tell people it's basket weaving and leathercraft, but it's I guess another point I want to make too, and in a couple weeks I'm going to be actually talking to the 6th grade students at Phoenixville Middle School. And one of the things that I want to impress upon them is not so much all this philanthropy stuff, but how in your journey in life, there are going to be ups and downs, and how you need to have faith in yourself. When I first went to look into getting a PhD at the University of Delaware, I thought I was going to get it in sociology. So I went to the dean of the Department of Sociology, and never really had too many defeats in my life up to that point, and applied and everything, had a personal interview with him, and he says, I can't accept you. You don't have what it takes to get a PhD. And I was like dumbfounded, you know, and it really hurt and just really depressed for a little while. And he said, you're not theoretical enough. So I was like devastated. So I went to another department, Urban Affairs and Public Policy, and was accepted there. And so I consider that, you know, it was, for me, it was a personal mountain to be climbed to get a PhD, because I always thought like, I felt like the dean did, you know, that I wasn't smart enough to get a PhD. But I had this drive to get one that I figured, well, if I get a PhD, I guess I'll prove to myself that I'm smart. So along the way, I mean, it was 7 years part-time, working, raising a family, taking several courses a semester, and felt like quitting a number of times, but that dean's words kept ringing in my ears, and I vowed that I was going to prove him wrong. So I did. So that's kind of the story of Urban Affairs and Public Policy. Yeah.
Do you envision yourself teaching at a college, only because you seem to have, Lou, a tremendous background and appreciation for education and awareness? Do you think maybe?
Yeah, actually I have. I've taught at Eastern University on the main line and Villanova University in their master's programs in public administration, and taught grant writing, different aspects of fundraising. I did that actually from 1988 to 2005 or 6.
Do you envision yourself possibly writing for the Wall Street Journal consistently, you know, along this topic, or?
Yeah,
A journal writing?
From this point on, I do hope to write more. I don't think I'm good enough to write for the New York Times, but that would be great. You know, I enjoy writing. I think it's a way of leaving a legacy, if you will, and it's a way of influencing people. I've always been, it's interesting you should say that about education, because that's one of the reasons why here locally I was able to have the good fortune of being able to get into local cable television and radio. I look at it as a way to help educate community. You know, it's not an ego trip for me to be on television or anything. It's, I like bringing educational things to the community. And so, yeah.
At the University of Valley Forge, they have a new program called Digital Media with all variations of it, and it's quite dynamic. I encourage you to possibly connect if you have not already. University of Valley Forge, they have a new major, they call it digital media, but they have all kinds of subdivisions for your program. I can see you maybe fitting in there quite well, possibly.
Well, maybe I'll look into that. So, let me go into some of the other things about the essays about philanthropy. Community philanthropy is another essay on community philanthropy. That's what we practice here in Phoenixville. Community philanthropy, I'll distinguish it from what we did at Pew, for example. Nothing against Pew, okay? But they're not immersed in any particular community. They fund all over the country, and it's strictly grant making. Whereas community philanthropy is not only grant making, and here at the Phoenixville Community Health Foundation, we've been fortunate over these 20 years to give back $34 million to the community. But it's much more than that. And I've always felt philosophically that there are lots of different roles that a foundation can play. And we, at different times, have played all of these roles. You could be a catalyst, you could be a broker, you can be an ambassador for the community, and you can be a capacity builder. And at different times over these 20 years, our foundation has played those roles. Capacity builder is one where we have developed certain programs to be able to help organizations build their capacity to be more efficient, effective, and impactful. Because I believe, as one of the essays in the book talks about, in the period that we're in now, okay, we can't rely on public sector money like we used to, okay? And the nonprofit philanthropic sector is going to be called upon more and more and more to do more. Now, we'll never be able to fill the total void because there is not enough money, but we're going to be called upon to do more and more than we've already done, okay? And that also relates to the nonprofits. The nonprofit communities are going to be relied upon, are asked to do more that public sector agencies were previously doing. So in order to be effective in that, they need to be strong organizations. And we, in addition to doing the grant making that we do, have always had something what we call informational memos. We feed back information to the nonprofits to say, you know, before you come back to us or you go to any other funder, you want to pay attention to these kinds of things so that your organization can be as strong as possible and you're going to be around for a while. And so we try to help them build their financial sustainability, governance sustainability, and that kind of thing. So the message is the nonprofit organizations like the Phoenixville Women's Outreach and PACS and Ann's Heart and all the other organizations like we have here in the community, more is going to be asked upon them. And so they need to be ready to be able to be strong and to do that stuff. I'm not going to go over all of these. One of the essays is about the importance of having mission, values, and vision. A mission basically is the purpose of why your organization is in existence. Why do you get up in the morning to do what you're doing? That's the purpose. The values are the beliefs that you hold that are kind of like the underpinnings of your organization, how you conduct yourselves ethically as an organization. They would be kind of your values. And then the vision are what you want to be when you grow up as an organization, 5, 10 years down the road. You know, do you want to be the best at what you're doing? Do you want to be the only one? Or whatever it is. It's a vision of what gives you something to strive for. And I often tell, when I was teaching, that you don't want to work for an organization that doesn't have a vision, because that's what kind of keeps you going. It's the vision to be an excellent group, and that kind of fills your juices as a professional to be able to strive for excellence. Let me get into some of these. Does anybody have any questions kind of about this? Yeah, Sarah?
How many nonprofit organizations are there in Phoenixville? I know there's lots.
There's lots.
Yeah.
And we're fortunate that way.
Right.
We fund about 80 to 85 a year.
Okay.
They're not all physically located here, but some of them might be physically located in Westchester, but they provide services here, or they might have a small satellite here. But we're blessed. Of all the communities in Chester County, I think we have the most nonprofits here, and we're fortunate. Not only do we have the most, but we have very good ones, okay? And not to embarrass Cheryl, but her organization is one of the newer organizations, and it is one of the best, because they, as I've told Cheryl, you know, they're coachable. You know, they want to learn, they want to do things the right way, and they take suggestions really, really well. And we have a lot of organizations like that here, so we're very fortunate in that sense.
How do you feel about endowments for the nonprofits? Do you think they're important for them? Or?
Oh, absolutely. Endowments give an organization a measure of financial independence and sustainability. One of the hurdles, though, is a lot of organizations feel, well, we have a hard time raising the money just to keep the doors open, you know, with general operating support. And if we really pursue developing an endowment, then it's going to take away from the money that we are raising, you know, an annual fund to keep the doors open. Okay, well, that's not really true, because people tend to fund endowments out of assets, whereas people tend to fund or respond to an annual fund out of their salaries and that kind of thing. So they really don't hurt each other. I'm a strong proponent of that. You know, colleges and universities couldn't exist without endowments. So, you know, like the old saying goes, you know, the journey of 1,000 miles starts with a single step, or however that goes. That's the way I believe with endowments, is an organization needs to start and be creative in the way that they can start to build it. Like, one of the things that's easy to build an endowment is a lot of organizations have newsletters. There are very few organizations that have any mention in there about remember us in your will, okay, for bequests. So the board could make a decision. Let's say somebody left you $50,000, they could say we're going to leave, put $25,000 of that toward an endowment, and we'll put $25,000 toward the operating expenses. Okay, that's one way of doing it. But you got to start. You got to start somewhere, and or it could be money from a special event, a small portion of it, then going to develop an endowment. So yes, I'm a very big proponent of endowments. It takes cultivation, it takes patience, but it's very, very important to do. So let me kind of go into some of these funny stories. These actually happened, whether you want to believe it or not. Let's see which one I picked out here. There's a gentleman who runs a nonprofit organization in the greater Phoenixville area that I've become particularly friendly with, and we're kind of friends in addition to having a professional relationship. So I happened to call him one day, and we're having a conversation, and all of a sudden I hear toilet flush. So I said, Eric, was that a toilet? And I hear flush. And he goes, yeah. He said, you're a funder. I'm going to take your phone call anywhere. True story, honest to God. Another funny story was there's a socialite, very, very, very wealthy lady in Chester County who was involved with this organization, and she helped put on this fundraiser. And the fundraiser was very successful, and they raised $50,000. So, as typically happens, you know, they go to have a check presentation ceremony, and this lady also happened to be a very poor driver. And she had a son who was also independently wealthy. So she drove her son out to this event. So they have the event, and the lady's like really taken by everything, and she's so motivated. She says, I'm going to match that $50,000 with my own $50,000. And her son turns to her and said, Mother, if you let me drive home, I'll match your $50,000. So the organization got $150,000 out of it. Another one about like what not to do when you're appealing to a funder is to do generic kinds of grant requests without going through what I'll call quality control. A friend of mine is the head of the local philanthropy arm of IBM, and she said, Lou, I got this really great proposal from this library, and it was one of the best proposals that I had ever gotten. She said there was only one problem with it. And I said, what was that? She says they asked for Dell computers.
Get stock in Dell computers.
Applying to IBM and asking for Dell computers. Oh, here's another one. A friend of mine who lives here in Phoenixville now, but earlier in his career, he worked for Vanguard out on the West Coast. And he was working with this, this gentleman who was a little quirky about setting up a charitable remainder trust. So it comes time to sign the document, and they had the appointed time. The guy shows up, my friend shows up in his three-piece suit, shine shoes and everything. He knocks on the door, the guy answers, and he said, well, I'm here, you know, to sign the agreement. And the guy says, I'm not going to sign it. And he goes, well, why not? He says, well, unless you cut my lawn, I'm not going to sign it. So he was a little eccentric, obviously. So the guy, my friend says to me, he said, what am I going to do? He says, we got hundreds of thousands of dollars at stake here. He said, so I cut his lawn. And I came back and he signed the document. Gosh, let me see. Oh, here's another one. I won't name it was an Ivy League president whose name is familiar, or was familiar. He's deceased now, but he was to go to SmithKline. This was years ago, so it was SmithKline, French pharmaceutical company, to go to meet with the president, along with the university's chairman of the board and the president of the university, to go and ask for $5 million for some particular project. So they're having the meeting, everything's going well, and the scripted part of this was that the president was supposed to ask him for the $5 million. Well, this president, as brilliant as he was, and he was a scholar and everything, he just froze up whenever he had to ask people for money. So having a conversation, comes time to ask for the money, he looks the president in the eye and he says, I'd like you to give us $50 million. And the president looks at him and he says, $50 million? He said, if you have the guts to ask me for $50 million, I'm going to give it to you. So he got $50 million instead of $5 million from the SmithKline pharmaceutical company. Wow. There's a story in here that's not funny, that it'll actually almost bring you to tears. And it's a story about a little boy who had some disabilities, and but he had a very kind heart, and it was around Valentine's Day, and he didn't want anything from his classmates. He just wanted to make out these Valentine cards. So he spent a lot of time making a Valentine card for all of his classmates, and it comes time, Valentine's Day, he gets on the bus, and his mother was a little anxious about this because she didn't know how he was going to be accepted. And end of the school day, the school bus comes, the kid gets off and he's excited, he goes, Mom, not a one. And she's like depressed. And he says, I didn't miss one. Everybody got a Valentine's card. And it was this kid who was more concerned about giving his classmates, and he didn't get one, but it didn't bother him. Okay? So that was touching. Let me see. Some of them are a little on the longer side, so I don't want to. Another colleague of mine, he works for a foundation here in the Philadelphia area, and they fund college scholarships as well as medical research and so forth. So a requirement is that they go out and do some site visits. So he was contacted by the university to see if he would take part in the commencement exercises. So he goes, yeah, that's pretty good. He says, I'll count this as a site visit, going to the graduation. A couple months go by, he doesn't think about anything. He shows up at the graduation, and he sits down, he opens up the program, and he's there listed as a speaker. And nobody had told him that he was to be a speaker. So in the book, you'll see he says, well, a lesson from that is to always have a speech in your pocket. That'll work for any occasion. There's another funny story. This gentleman comes to a art museum, and he wants to donate an Elvis on
Velvet?
velvet painting. And they were able to turn it down because they had a gift acceptance policy that said that if you donate a piece of art, you have to donate also the money to keep it, maintain it. So they got out of a sticky situation, and he wanted to donate it to Elvis on what do you call it?
Velvet.
Velvet. Weird situation.
I thought they only lived on the city streets on the walls.
Let me see here.
If you had-
Oh, here's another one. This happened at Pew. Excuse me. And this happened actually not to me, but to one of the people who was working with me as a grant analyst. Now, at the time, he was going to law school, and he also wrote jokes for comedians. He had a great sense of humor. So, this guy comes in from this children's agency in Dallas, Texas. I remember, he was a big guy, three-piece suit, and he expected to see Bob Smith, who was the head of Glenmead at the time. And so he comes in and he sees, he's greeted by Howard, the guy's name is Howard. And Howard is like 5 levels down from the president of Glenmead. And the guy is like, well, how long have you been here? It's very cocky, but you know, because, so Howard, being the comedian that he is, says, long enough to significantly affect your future. So he really took that guy down to a level and humbled him very, very much. So philanthropy can have its funny side, can have its quirky side. And, you know, what I'd like to leave you with is that, you know, we're all philanthropists in one way or another, whether you look at yourself that way or not. It's whether you give $2 into to the church basket, or if you're a multi-millionaire like the Gates and give away billions and billions of dollars, okay? And everything in between, we're all philanthropists. And part of the philosophy of my book is that we all have an obligation to give back to the best of our means, because we're all in this together and we need to help our fellow man or woman. And that's what philanthropy is all about. Philanthropy, if you take the word apart, means love of mankind. And I personally feel that people that are given a lot also have a lot to, are responsible for giving back a lot. There's 2 famous quotes that I use a lot that I think really put things into perspective. And one is by Muhammad Ali. We think of Muhammad Ali as the world champion boxer, but he was also a great humanitarian. And one of his famous sayings was, service to others is the rent we pay for a room here on earth. Okay, so we're all called to pay that rent back to the best of our ability. Another one was Arthur Ashe, the world champion tennis player, who basically had the same kind of message when he said, start where you are, use what you have, do what you can. So whether you're a low-income person, you're an accountant, whether you're a multimillionaire, whatever, we're all called to give back and do what we can to make a difference in the world. So that's kind of, you have something else?
I want to ask you, when they've done the philanthropy with, and set up the things at the middle school and the high school.
The Youth and Philanthropy Program?
Yes. I knew some of the students, and they found it a very enlightening, rewarding experience to go through that.
Yeah.
And
we instituted that program probably 13, 14, 15 years ago. And we did it for the reason that we want to grow philanthropists in the community. And that's a great way to do it when you're dealing with young kids. And what we consistently get out of that, now we have the program in the Phoenixville Middle School, Phoenixville High School, Methacton Middle School, Renaissance Academy, and this year we expanded into, Owen J. Roberts Middle School. And this year we expanded into Pope John Paul II up in Limerick. Consistently, we get out of it, kids say they learn an awful lot about their own community. They learn that they're not living in a bubble anymore, that there are people who are really in need. They learn teamwork. They learn decision-making. They learn compromising. And the thing that they like about it most, and the middle school kids get like $6,000 to give away. And they like the fact that they can make their decisions and not have somebody, not an adult, tell them what to do or what not to do. So each of those programs does have a monitor or a coordinator to guide things. But the kids do everything over the course of an academic year that a foundation would do. I mean, they give themselves a name, they establish a mission statement. Sometimes the kids, in addition to the money that we give them, also would like to bolster that by doing their own fundraisers. Okay, so they can do a fundraiser. They interview the organizations. They might do a site visit, and then at the end of the year, they have a little ceremony to give away the money. And it's very enlightening for them. And one of the things that, this happened to me about, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, was at the Phoenixville Middle School. And when we're invited, Lynn Hartman and I are invited to go to the little check award ceremonies. We went, and I like to go around and talk to the kids and say, like, what did you get out of all this? And this one kid came up to me and he said, I said, what did you get out of it? Did you like the program? And he looks at me with almost tears in his eyes, and he says, I never thought that I could be a leader. Now I know I can. And that was his exact words. And it was a very powerful moment. And so philanthropy, can really change people's lives. And we like to think that as these kids get older, that they'll carry on that tradition as they become parents and live in their own communities, and they'll learn about giving back. So it's a great way to plant a seed. And so we hope to continue to expand the Youth and Philanthropy program. It's been really, really good. It's kind of small potatoes for us. It's $6,000. I mean, the whole program, we give a stipend to the teacher. So it doesn't cost us very much to do as a foundation, but the benefit is tremendous in terms of the impact on the kids.
When you give $6,000 to children that are 13 years old.
That's a lot of money.
That's power,
Yeah.
It's no different when you do the Leadership Academy, you give somebody $500 seed money.
Yeah.
And you have to find your project and fund it and move and raise money and everything. It's just, there's very empowering things that the foundation has come up with,
Well, we enjoyed being a part of this community and doing the programs that we've done. It's a privilege and an honor to be a part of all this. And we're just fortunate to be in a good community that really appreciates it and that has a lot of good people, like all of you, who are involved in the community in some way, shape, or form. And so it's a good partnership. As I said before, it's a partnership kind of a thing.
One last question. If thinking back on your whole career, what if you could have changed something or done something different in your road, would you have, and where did you feel that you made the most difference?
That's a lot.
I know.
Question.
Somebody has to ask them.
No, the reason I'm hesitating, it's not a hard question for me to answer, but my real desire when I was growing up was to be a professional baseball player. And, I've always wanted that, and I tell people, that I was like too slow, and they used to time me with a calendar instead of a stopwatch. And then I had a little league bat. I had a big league glove, a little league bat. But I've had some good experiences. So short of doing that, the program development side, I think, along the way, programs that I helped develop at Child Inc. Along the way, when I was at Child Inc., did a couple of things that I think were really, I've often thought about this, when I'm hopefully 85 years old and sitting on a porch in a rocking chair, that I can reflect back and say I really made a difference. I think I told you that I was hired as a research director there with the first Family Foundation grant. And that was to do 2 studies that had never been done before in the state of Delaware. And that was to do a study on reported child abuse throughout the state, and the other one was on unreported child abuse. And those 2 studies highlighted the issue for the first time ever in the state of Delaware. And the legislature, as a result of that, gave $100,000 more into the budget of the Division of Social Services, which at the time, this is how far down, this is 1977, the issue of child abuse and neglect was in the state of Delaware. It was located in the Division of Social Services, and it was a subunit of that. And the Division of Social Services was a part of the Department of Health and Social Services. So it got short shrift, okay, as an issue. So the study helped highlight that. And $100,000 may not sound like a lot now, but back in 1977, it was a whole lot more, okay? So that's one thing. The other thing was, as an outgrowth of that, we wrote a grant to one of the federal agencies for a parent education program for child abuse prevention. And that program went into existence in 1978, and it's still going on 40 years later at Child Inc. And over that period of time, literally thousands and thousands of people have gone through that program, because we set up at the time what we called community sites, where we would get rented space or donated space from a church, and the program was like 10 weeks, 9 or 10 weeks long, and we teach different aspects of parenting to new parents. And in some cases, actually a judge might dictate that parents had to go through this if they were going through a nasty divorce or something like that. And then we had school sites where we'd go in and talk to kids who were future parents and teach them about the ins and outs of parenting. So that's something, Dora, I think, about making a difference. And then right before I left Child to go to Pew, we wrote a $895,000 grant to do a number of things, and the biggest thing to come out of that was the development of the Department of Children, Youth, and Family Services, which is a cabinet-level position under the governor of Delaware. And so that helped raise the whole issue about children, youth, and family services. And I think, the work here, not only the money that we're able to give away, but the programs, like feel good about the Executive Leadership Institute that we've instituted now in our 6th year for current executive directors and aspiring executive directors, to teach them leadership skills over a 10-month period. And we feel really good, Lynn Hartman and I feel really good about the fact that we're kind of helping to build a base of strengthening the nonprofits that serve our community through that program. So fortunate to have a great board. Couldn't ask for better boards along the way in these 20 years, particularly Dick Kunch, who was our original chairperson for 6 years, and he's still a board member emeritus. Great guy. I mentioned him in the book as one of the big influences in my professional career. So anyway, that's the ins and outs of me, and a little bit about the ups and downs, the detours. Everybody has times in their professional life that didn't go well, but fortunately most of the things have gone well, and I have a lot of people to thank for that. So I have books here if anybody is interested in purchasing one. It's at a discount at $15, and they're signed, and be more than happy to answer any questions anybody has.
I got one question. You went from only one response to lots of funny stories. How did they show up after you? What did you do? Just get on the phone and start calling people, or how did you?
Well, I'd go to meetings, I would ask people for different stories, and it took 14 years, but I got the 32 stories.
Where's the oldest paint on Velvet? I have a real reason for asking that one. Where is that today? The oldest.
Oh, I don't know, because that came from far away from a foundation far away, so I don't know what it is, but it's a true story. They're all true stories.
We're doing an Elvis musical at Forge next year. And you
Oh,
guys
really?
know, but I know next year's season already. Whee-hee, I'd love to get my hands on.
Yeah, there is a funny side to philanthropy. We try to make it fun as much as possible. So, well, thank you
Thank
very
you,
much
Lou.
for your
Thank
attention.
you.